Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. I usually start each episode by listing off a number of escalating and, I admit, intentionally frightening stats about the rising number of cybersecurity threats facing the industrial sector. The goal is to get your attention and reinforce how your data, operations, and all those vital assets continue to be so vulnerable. Today's guest, however, might argue that our strategies also need to acknowledge the human factor of cybersecurity. Instead of tailoring our strategy to focus exclusively on what's at risk, we also need to remember the people that will play such a crucial role in carrying out these strategies and making sure we're arming these individuals with not just the right tools, but the right tools for them. Before we start, I do have one stat to share because, well, first, I can't resist, but also because it helps reinforce the importance of the people factor in cybersecurity. Last month, solutions provider Zscaler announced findings showing that nearly 90% of all cyber threats start with malware downloads from links shared in emails or through targeted websites. The hackers are focused on people and their activities, and according to Ken Fanger at On Technology Partners, so should we. Ken, thanks so much for joining us today. In our dialogue back and forth, you talked about humanizing cybersecurity. I thought that was a really interesting concept, but for those who aren't familiar, could you kind of talk through that a little bit and how that could relate to the industrial sector specifically?
So let me start. This journey started, I wrote my book, Relax, A Guide to True Cybersecurity. And that was 30 years of all the mistakes and screw-ups that I've done in the past. And I started to notice this trend in my industry. We have this idea, and it's something I'm talking with Dr. Adams out of the UK. She's part of a movement called usable security. And so what this came down to was we spend a lot of time figuring out how to protect the technology and creating artificial intelligence. And this idea that we're going to artificial intelligence ourselves, this data from Star Trek, solution to all of our problems. The thing is, any artificial intelligence that one person can create, the hackers in Russia, who are really well-paid geniuses, are going to find a way to get around. And it always comes back down to the person you're protecting. And so as I locked Humanizing Security, she wrote an article, The User is Not the Enemy, back in 1995, and she talked mainly about passwords. And I worked in pharmaceutical at that time, and one of the rules was you had to change your password, which had to be complex, every 90 days. I know the federal government thought that was a secure way to do it, but everybody in the building wrote down every password because it was not humanly possible to remember one complex password, much less dozens over years. And so we get what I kind of call this security illusion, where we think we put more security, more complexity on top of it, and that makes us safer, but it really doesn't. Because we start to do workarounds. And I was talking with Dr. Adams, we started to talk about people have so much security that people on the floor, people doing operations, they start to try to find ways to get around the security to do their job. But it's always funny because when you have the security people come back together to talk about it, they talk about how to stop those workarounds instead of embracing the workarounds and saying, okay, why did they put them in the first place? What was the security doing that stopped them from doing their job? And we need to start asking the question, how is it the user can be made better, safer, and more secure? And so that's one of the things that I started to realize is we have to start the journey from the user, get the user to see the value, and then have the value define the security. And we kind of go in and say, we have to secure everything, zero trust. I understand where they're kind of coming from, but that doesn't take into account how's a user going to react to it? Why does a user accept it? If I can take a moment to tell you a great story, it'll kind of help you see where manufacturing comes in. About 7 or 8 years ago, I had an engineer working with one of our clients. He was a manufacturer, mid-sized manufacturer, about $25 million. And they had a server. And my engineer would go in there and he'd say, we got to back up your server. We need to back up your server. And the owner said, I'm not going to pay $250 a month to back up my server. I don't care. He came back every week and he told me in our team meeting, I can't get him to buy this. So I said, wait a minute, let me come out and talk to him. So I went out there and I talked to him. I said, okay, I got a question for you. How are you taking your orders? He says, well, they come in through our order taking system. I said, and then what happens? Well, then it gets put out to the plant floor. They create the production line request, and then we produce the item. I said, where is that information stored? He said, I have no idea. I said, do you know it's stored on that computer next to your secretary's desk? He's like, no, I didn't know that. I said, is it worth $250 to make sure that we keep your plant running if that gets broken? He said, oh my gosh, yes. He was ready to sign the check. The problem was not that my engineer did anything wrong, but he was so focused on the server needs to be protected, he forgot to ask why the server needs to be protected. And so that's one of the things in this humanizing is information isn't valuable unless it's valuable to the people. And if we don't connect those two, people will go out of their way to get around security we implement.
In that same vein, you've also discussed some of these security measures that are being put in place can actually end up being more of a detriment than a positive for the enterprise. Maybe you could talk us through some of that.
So let's go back to that pharmaceutical. So the FDA, it's a highly regulated industry, and the FDA would come out and do, quote, surprise visits. And so I would end up running around to every single desk and ripping off Post-it notes so that those weren't laying around. When you get, so you've probably heard about rogue access points coming into environments because people can't get on to do their job. And so you end up doing non-secure things to get around onerous security positions. And so you end up opening it up. Passwords are a big one. You start coming up with ways to create similar passwords that are not the same, but you can remember. And so as security gets harder and harder to work, you end up in a situation where you don't use it. So I kind of call it this: Fort Knox is safe until you open the front door. And so you have this situation where if security is so secure that people can't do their jobs, they'll just stop doing their job. If you make it so they can't work, they'll get frustrated, they'll give up. I remember talking with a lot of the chemists, and they'd be like, I just want to get the drug made, and I can't even log into my computer. It'd be 5 minutes when they'd be looking for passwords or what other security. Or we're working with a company that does construction. The security was so onerous on the computers that their CAD programs wouldn't load for 25 minutes.
Wow.
It's not, I understand what you're trying to protect, but it stops being functional. I was out at Bowling Green about 2 weeks ago, Bowling Green College out here in Ohio, and I was doing a presentation, and I asked some of the students, how would you like a Corvette? And all of them said, yeah, I'd love a classic Corvette. I said, how'd you like a classic Corvette in a block of cement? And none of them wanted it. And I said, well, why don't you want it? He said, well, I can't even see it. I can't drive it. I can't use it. That'd be the most secure Corvette in the world, but it'd have no function. And so that's where we kind of lose it. We are so worried about zero trust and protecting everything. We have to ask the question, does this mean our people can't produce, can't create what they need to do?
So Ken, I can appreciate where you're coming from, but I can see a lot of people out there going, well, so what are we supposed to do? If we don't use passwords, we're completely, naked to attacks. So we have to do something. Is it just about finding a middle ground and talking to people, or what is the end solution then?
And the thing is this, you have to be secure, but you need to bring the person who you're securing along with you. One of the things I was also talking with Dr. Lynn out at Stanford is we tend to see this security as this monolithic thing that gets brought down to us from on high. And it needs to be, I love the example, and all of your manufacturing people will know this, more like quality. Quality is done by department usually. Every department is supposed to create quality. We need to do that with security as well. You want the departments to be promotional of your security. Yes, we can keep passwords, but what is it that's stopping us from using them? Is it really making it better? What other security? Am I able to do my job? They should be in the conversations, not put on top of them. And unfortunately, we're working with the new CMMC, Cyber Maturity Model Certification, which is part of the Department of Defense. That is very much a top-down type of approach. It's very heavy-handed. It's very hard to implement. We've worked with 68 companies so far, and many of them are like, maybe we just get out of government. Maybe we just be done.
Wow.
And so that's one of the perfect examples. We're going to end up reducing our defense industry base because so many companies, especially smaller ones, are going to say, I just can't do that work. I can't afford it. I can't do the amount of effort to get there. And so even though they think they're secure because they're protecting the information, all of a sudden they're going to go from 100 potential vendors down to 2. It's going to raise costs because you have to raise costs for this. And I love, there's a hacker called Joshua. I would love to tell his story as well. But hackers, if you only have one or two targets, even the best security can get broken if I can really isolate down. And so the less we have a diverse base, the less secure we become, even though we're like, look at how secure those two people are. And, you know, and let me tell you Josh's story quick. He is a hacker. He gets paid to go and hack people. He was hacking a bank. And what he did was he went to the back door every day, knocked on the back door until somebody opened it. And then he told them this story about how he's a contractor. He lost his badge. He had to come in and deal with IP latency. The person let him in. But he said something, and this is really one of the things that helped me on my journey. He said, you know, it's a shame. We punish people for trying to do good things. The person that let him in was trying to help him. He gave him a sad story. And so, yes, we want to make sure people don't do that because the hackers are going to use that to get through. But we don't want to make them feel bad. And that's where that humanizing security comes in, is we don't want people, and we do this a lot, we don't want people to feel that because they got hacked, they are innately bad people. They are innately stupid. They are innately, I was in Washington for a conference and a vendor said, you can't patch stupid. And I sat there and I thought to myself, if we're calling our customers stupid, why would they ever share with us what's happening? Why would they ever want to help us fix it? So I have a great story. We work with several financial institutions. One of them got a call from Microsoft that said, you have a virus, we need to get on your computer. The person let them on their computer, but they stopped. And I tell everyone, these are the 3 steps I always recommend if you're in the middle of an attack. Relax, evaluate, and act. Because the hackers know when you're in a heightened state, you'll do things that you probably shouldn't do. If you're excited, if you're scared, if you're angry. And so they try to keep you in an excited or scared or angry state. That's what Microsoft, the Microsoft person was doing. And so what it comes down to was this person realized within a few moments, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, called us and let us know what happened. We were able to get in. We saw what they were trying to do. Now, we did have other security on their system, so they didn't get into anything. But anyone that's in the hacker world will tell you, the longer they have to try, the more likely they're going to find a hole. So the fact that this person, and we thanked her, and it was great because the fact that she stepped up and wasn't afraid of us saying, how stupid could you have let that call come through, but thank you for telling us it happened, makes a difference. And that's where working with your owners. So yeah, that's where the user conversation really comes in.
Well, it's interesting because there's a line there between accountability and simply embracing the fact that you are going to be attacked and somebody stepped forward with the information. You know, a lot of things you just said there, accountability is one thing that came forward as sort of a gray area in terms of dealing with cybersecurity defense. Another one is time. When we talk about the human factor in all of this, most manufacturers are going to say, I appreciate that. I want my workers' input. But do we have to sit down and talk about it every time I want to put in a security measure? Because that takes time off the plant floor and I'm losing production. How would you respond to that argument?
Well, and I'll talk about, so I went out and I was helping a manufacturing company evaluate how they should change their manufacturing process, looking at ERP systems. I was only one vendor out of 10 that sat down and talked to the plant floor manager. The rest of them said, here's our solution. I understand it takes time, but if you want them not to find ways to work around it, if you want them to be engaged with it, that's an investment that seems worth it. Now, I'm not saying if you change your antivirus from McAfee to Norton, you have to have them sit down and talk about it. But you do want them to have a way to come back to you and say, well, you know, you put on Norton and it takes me 25 minutes to log in. And you want to hear their complaints and you want them to share that. So you might go in and put in a security system, but say, please let us know how it works. What are your workarounds that you're getting to work? Because you should take those back and say, okay, every day they don't log in and they're using their own laptop. What's going on? Because is it really worth losing 25 minutes from 10 really expensive engineers every day to not have to ask them a question for an hour at the beginning of the project?
Yeah.
You know, I always understand we're always about time. I'm a project manager and everything's about time, but taking time to plan in the beginning pays off in the long run. And if you're more secure but productive, you're going to be a lot happier.
Makes sense. I can appreciate where you're coming from. Another thing that you mentioned, Ken, were some of the critical parts of cybersecurity planning. You talked about preparation, response, and recovery. I was hoping maybe you could talk through theirs, and in particular, in each one of those, but in particular recovery, because you said that's really the one that can be overlooked sometimes. Kind of an interesting perspective.
So I call it the aware, address, and arise situations. So I call it aware because that's before an attack happens. All of us should be in the aware stage, asking the questions, what are we doing? And here's something that nobody ever takes the time to really ask is, what is the real value of what I'm protecting? So I talk with people, the CMMC is very much about protecting CUI, controlled unclassified information. Sorry, I have to stop and remember that every so often. So what it comes down to is, what is the information that's really important to your business? And what is it worth to your business? I ask people when I do my seminars, do you own a boat? And then I ask, do you have boat insurance? And I'm waiting for the one day that one person raises their hand that has boat insurance that didn't have a boat. You don't want to put security onto things that don't matter. You don't want to take a lot of time to protect the memo about the company picnic. So when you understand first what's important and then what's its value, then you can start to see the conversations of how do I protect it? And then it comes down to risk. What is it worth? How much are you willing to take a chance that things will be fine versus fixing it? I'll tell you a story. I worked for that pharmaceutical company. This is in my book, so I'll make this one a quick version of it. But we had an old System 36 that had been being used for 25 years. I had gone in and said, we want to upgrade this. We need to upgrade this. I was a new engineer. I just came on as a network administrator only a month earlier. I'm like, this has to be upgraded. They said, no, we don't want to spend $4 million right now. We're a $150 million company. They didn't say they were. I just want to give you a frame of reference. It wasn't worth that type of investment. Sure. A month later, it crashes. And all the backups crashed with it because it was that old. So this pharmaceutical industry that requires to have 7 years of batch information was all gone. Wow. It cost us $45 million to recover.
Wow.
Because we didn't want to spend 4, it cost us 45. But at the same time, for 25 years, it always worked.
Yeah.
So you get that it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality, but that becomes a danger. And the longer it ain't broke, the more likely next year it'll be the year it does.
Yeah.
And so, that's one of the things you have to think about is what's important. Am I really going to consider it? They just felt it was never going to crash. The CEO was confident it was never, ever, ever going to crash because it never had. It's gone through other CEOs. The problem is when you're the one on the bridge that falls, you fall.
Yeah. I think we experienced a lot of that during the pandemic. There was a lot of things that were then tested that we thought was fine, realized we needed further investment. Cybersecurity definitely being one of them. We saw a bunch of upticks in attacks during that time for a number of reasons we've discussed on the program before. In particular, can we look at the recovery portion of the plan? Why do you feel like that is sometimes just dismissed? Is it just because that's not something you're thinking about in the course of, as you alluded to, it's always worked? So why do we have to worry about fixing it afterwards?
What I call the arise stage, first of all, we ignore the fact that a cyber attack has an emotional segment to it. We had a company, the accounts payable person got a email from a vendor that said they had a $125,000 payment that needed to be made, and they gave them a bank account. The person made the payment.
Yeah.
It was a fraudulent payment. The money was gone. The normal reaction that I hear is that person needs to be punished. They made a mistake. Now, fortunately, this company didn't do it that way. This company, we sat down, we talked with her, we created a new process and policies to deal with it because they never dealt with it before.
Yeah.
And so, but she was in tears. And so we tend to forget that people that get attacked, this is hurt, this is damage, this is emotional. We have to recover the money and the data, but we don't say we have to recover the person. And I think that's an important part in this journey is thinking about all three of those. How are we going to recover? People don't take the time to ask if we do get attacked. Cyber insurance is great, but 2 things. One, it doesn't always pay. There's been some real problems with them saying, oh, you didn't do these steps to be prepared. That's an issue. But the other problem is money doesn't always repair what's lost. And so if it was critical data, if you have very important, so we have a food company, if they lose their recipes, they're gone. They're done. They can't, pharmaceutical, if you lose those batch records and you can't prove to the government, they will shut you down. There's not a question. And so these types of things, so you do have to recover the money, you do have to recover the data, but we also have to recover the person. We have to make them feel like they're comfortable. One of the problems I have with cyber training is they kind of call you stupid for clicking on the links. And they make you go through very onerous training that doesn't say, it's okay, you made a mistake, you're a person. And I always tell this story to try and get everybody to understand. So real story, I always ask the first question, do you think a rocket scientist is smart? Most of the time I get a yes answer from everybody. One time I had a person say, no, they're not that smart. This is an aerospace engineer, genius. He is a colonel in the Air Force. He's trained all over the world. When he was in college, he got his wallet stolen. 2 days later, he got a phone call from the police. Hi, this is the police. We have your wallet. We just need your PIN to confirm it. I see from your reaction, you know exactly what happened. Yeah. And I'm like, if this rocket scientist and literally one of the smartest people I've ever met can be tricked, any of us can be tricked. And so we got to stop blaming the victim for what happened because it just happens. And we need to be more supportive. We need to, now I will tell you, and this is an argument people make, if you have a training program in policies and people aren't following the policies, then yes, that's a different conversation. But if you haven't trained them, if you haven't gotten them up to speed and they make a mistake, there is no such thing as common sense. You can't say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done it. Because if you're working and you've got 100 emails coming in and you're in accounts payable, you may not go through a long iterative process to check and vet everything that comes in. You don't have time to do it. And so that's where we have to. What we did with that one company was anytime there's a bank change request, you have to call a known good phone number. And for everybody out there that doesn't know what that means is don't use the phone number on the email.
Exactly.
Make sure, what I'll do is if I get a request from a company, I'll find them on the web, I'll call them directly and ask if the request really came from them. You usually have your vendor information. Call your known trusted vendor. A 5-minute phone call saving $125,000. I don't know about you, I'd love to make $125,000 for a 5-minute phone call. Yeah. It's worth it, and it's one of those steps, but not punishing the person afterwards. And I'm going to tell you, this is not a manufacturing story, but it was a tragic story. So I've been doing these presentations all around the country, and a college girl came up to me, and she said she was stupid. She was sharing pictures with her boyfriend on Instagram, and it got hacked, and somebody put those pictures onto adult websites. She wanted to be a teacher. She thinks that career is now over for her. That's a tragic story, but what happened next was even more tragic. I started to share this story, and people told me, well, maybe she doesn't deserve to be a teacher if she did that.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's a harsh thing to do. This person didn't do anything wrong. They trusted Instagram to give a level of security that they didn't give. Why should her life be over? And right. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the arise, the recovery stage of this. We have to take the people as part of the damage, not blame them, not say you can't patch stupid. You can't. They are not stupid. The people get paid billions of dollars. This is a massive industry to find ways to trick you into giving you their money or giving them your money. And we have to remember that while we're recovering people, they are people. They have emotions. They feel bad. I don't want to destroy lives that have already been destroyed by the attack themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. We've talked in depth in previous episodes about the growing complexity of these organizations. It's not just some guy sitting in his mom's basement anymore. Keeping all the things that you discussed previously in context, are there any types of attacks right now that are really on your radar screen or that you're seeing growing in prevalence that we should be aware of?
The big ones that I'm seeing, we've done a good job of putting security on the endpoints, on the computers. So they're going back to a lot of phone calls. We're seeing people getting a lot of phone calls because people have kind of ignored phone calls. Texting is a really big one because I think we need to get a lot more security on the texting. And the problem is legitimate companies, part of me kind of wonders about this, are also spamming us with texting. I feel like they're being hackers to me. So you get overwhelmed. And again, one of the goals is to overwhelm you, because when you feel overwhelmed, you get anxious and you just want to do something and get on to the next thing. So I'm sure we all remember, we just went through a political cycle, the nightmare of all the texts that came through. You want to be on this candidate or that candidate, give me your opinion, they're sneaking in on those conversations with hack attacks. Social media is getting really attacked again because people seem to want to share. During the pandemic, this was a big problem. People were, I just heard yesterday, I was doing a presentation and somebody lost $19,000 because they met a girl in the military who was out in Ukraine and needed money. And so they pull on our heartstrings. We're punishing people. They're punishing people for doing good things. If we call them stupid, we turn around and punish them a second time.
Yeah.
So be careful with text, be careful with phone calls. If you don't know them, don't answer them.
No, it makes sense. I mean, we talk about phishing and stuff like that coming through email, but there's other outlets as well as we sort of evolve our technological utilization in a number of different fields. Yep. So, Ken, we've talked a lot about the bad stuff. Let's talk about some of the good guys a little bit. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do and what On Technology Partners is all about.
So we have been around for 30 years and we're bringing this humanizing security. So the big thing we're working with is helping smaller companies, usually less than $100 million, to get ready for the new CMMC. And one of the things I've been telling people, because we have a lot of companies that are saying, well, we're going to wait and see what the government does. That's fine, except for when the government finally decides to do it, you might not have time to put things into place. And I try to explain to people, nobody was born and started running a marathon. You want to start, anytime you do any type of compliance, especially security compliance, start with a few things. Make it small, get your staff on board. This is where that humanizing comes back in our journey. Do a few things. Have your roadmap for everything, but don't try to do it all. Let your team get used to a few changes. Be that frog in the slowly heating water, because if you throw everything really quick on top of them, you'll overwhelm them, you'll overwhelm yourself, and you don't exist to do cybersecurity. You exist to make something wonderful. Let's make cybersecurity slowly become part of the nature of what you do. So that's how we've been approaching it. We usually take people up to what's called level 1, which has 17 controls. Get used to that. Even if you need to go to the higher levels, get your team used to that first level conversation. Then let's start to implement more and more and more. Yes, it's going to take more time, but you're going to get real adoption. And if you're just going to go for the checkbox, the fear I have is the government's looking for the people who aren't doing it. They've told us they want to punish, which I hate this approach. Their idea is punish the first one really bad. It's that when you go to jail, find the biggest guy and beat him up, and then everybody else will respect you. The problem is that means some company is going to get destroyed because they didn't take it seriously enough fast enough. And I don't think that's the way to get people on board. I think that's the way to get people terrified. And so we're trying to do it differently. We start by doing one domain. There's 16 domains, 110 controls. Get used to one domain. Usually we pick physical because that's something most companies already are doing. And it usually just consists of putting locks in a sign-in sheet. Do it real easily. Get that going. Get comfortable with it. Then take the next step. Then when you get to the harder stuff, you've already gotten people used to the idea we have to follow these processes.
Kind of wrapping things up here, Ken, when you look over the next maybe 12, 18 months, are there some trends that you're seeing, either good or bad, that could really affect things from a cybersecurity perspective?
And one of the big things is I think it's Industry 4.0, IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things. The automating of plant floors is expanding a lot. The problem is a lot of these companies, we're working with one of our customers and they got a brand new scrap metal scale. It's running on Windows 98.
Wow.
It does a job great, but it cannot be secured. It cannot be protected. And so there is this problem where a lot of new technology has not implemented the security that might be required. And people bring it onto their networks because they don't know there's a problem. And so one of the things, especially if you're going to work with the Department of Defense or any government moving forward, you have to understand that that equipment has to be isolated from your network. So you have your OT network, your operational technologies network separate from your informational technologies network. And that adds complexity where it never was complex before. So that trend is going to continue. Automation on the floor is going to continue. And there's going to be a push to up the security on that equipment, but they're probably 5 to 10 years behind where they need to be. And so you're going to be in this catch-22. I need that new weighting system, but I can't secure that new weighting system. How do I deal with that? Yeah. And that's the risk journey that you're going to have to take. Is it worth the money to take the risk of getting hacked, but have that scale that lets you operate every day faster?
Well, and even if you're not a government contractor, you still need that equipment secure regardless. So,
yes, excellent. You do.
Ken, a ton of great insights here. Really appreciate you taking the time. Anything else you'd like to add before we kind of wrap it up?
So I'm really excited. Like I said, my book is an example of all the mistakes. And one of the things that I try to tell anybody in cybersecurity is to remember, show your flaws because people feel more comfortable. I don't want to work with a person that has never experienced what I'm going through. And that's one of the things that I think our industry needs to change is don't try to always come across perfect. Another quick story. We were rolling out about 6 years ago, multi-factor authentication. My wife, who owns the company with me, she had messed up her Outlook and decided on her own she was going to go find another version of Outlook. It wasn't Microsoft's. She put in her credentials and we did get hacked. I'm telling you this story and I've been telling it for 6 years since it happened. So we followed our protocol, which if you're a cybersecurity company, one of the things you do is you reached out to every one of the contacts and all of our customers and informed them that we had a breach. This is what happened. Do not ignore these emails. The response from almost all of them was universally, thank you. The thing that I thought was interesting was a few of them said, how can you admit to being hacked?
Yeah.
My response to them was, if I'm a cybersecurity company, how could I not admit to being hacked? How could I ask you to tell your customers you did it if I couldn't tell you that I did it? And so that's what I want to leave anyone that is thinking about it. If a company says they've never had any issue, be a little concerned because it means that something's happened they don't know about.
Interesting. Ken, I'm assuming what's the name of the book?
Relax, A Guide to True Cybersecurity.
Okay, and that's available on Amazon, anyplace else?
Yep.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. For more on the work On Technology does, you can go to www.ontechpartners.com. Thanks for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can email me at jeff@ien.com. For Ken Fanger, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.